The village of Tsukahana lay at the edge of an ancient forest, where mist curled around the trees like lingering whispers of forgotten dreams. Each dawn, the sun hesitated at the horizon before spilling its golden light across rooftops, as though afraid to disturb the hush that blanketed the town. The villagers lived by the rhythm of the seasons, tending rice fields, weaving silk, and offering quiet prayers at the moss-covered shrine that stood at the village's heart. But when the sun dipped below the mountains, the village changed. Shadows stretched long over narrow streets. Doors were bolted. Lanterns flickered uneasily, their flames wavering as though sensing unseen eyes. Even the wind stilled, reluctant to stir the silence. It was said that something moved beyond the tree line in the twilight hours, when the world balanced on the edge of waking and dreaming. A woman with silver hair had been seen walking through the pines. Sometimes she appeared at the river's edge, her reflection rippling like moonlight on the water. Other times, she was glimpsed at the outskirts of the village, her dark robes blending seamlessly with the night. No one knew where she had come from, or why her presence made the air feel heavy as if the world was holding its breath. Some whispered she was an omen, a spirit of things yet to come. Rotaro, a painter known for capturing fleeting beauty with aching precision, had never feared such stories. He had grown up hearing the old tales, of fox spirits, of wandering ghosts, of gods who walked among mortals in disguise. But to him, they were just that, stories. What mattered was light and shadow, the delicate movement of a brush across silk. Truth, he believed, lay in the strokes of ink, not in the fears of villagers who saw spirits in every rustling branch. And yet, even Rotaro could not deny the pull of the unknown. One autumn evening, as the maple leaves bled crimson into the wind, he wandered beyond the village, seeking solitude in the whispering bamboo groves. The air carried the scent of wisteria, rich, intoxicating. The trees swayed, though no breeze touched them. The world felt altered. The path ahead twisted in ways it never had before, shifting like something alive beneath his feet. His lantern light wavered, flickering like a mirage. And then, she was there, standing beneath the arching boughs. Her silver hair cascaded over her shoulders, strands catching the fading light like woven moonlight. Her eyes, dark, endless, held his, unreadable yet familiar, neither welcoming nor forbidding, simply inevitable. "You are the one who sees," she murmured, her voice like water over stones. Rotaro's breath caught. He had never met her before, and yet something about her was achingly familiar, like a half-remembered melody, like a face glimpsed in a dream. He opened his mouth, but no words came. She stepped forward, the hem of her robe brushing the fallen leaves. "You seek beauty, do you not?" He swallowed. "Ido." A faint smile played on her lips. "Then paint me." The words rang through the air like an unspoken promise. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled. A deep, resonant sound that did not belong to any temple Rotaro knew. The forest rustled. The ground beneath him seemed to shift, though his feet remained still. A hush settled over the world. Even the insects had fallen silent. The wind pressed through the trees, soft at first, then stronger, pulling at the edges of his robe. The air thickened with something unseen. The woman did not move. Her expression remained calm, yet the weight of her gaze deepened as if she were looking beyond his flesh and into the marrow of his soul. He had painted noble women, travelers, even a priestess once, but never had he painted someone who felt less like a subject and more like a mystery waiting to be unraveled. The lantern flickered. Rotaro blinked. The moment stretched, elongated, becoming something more than mere time. The shadows behind her lengthened, shifting like ink spilled across the ground. He had not noticed before, but the air smelled of wisteria. The petals, soft and violet, drifted in the breeze, though no trees nearby bore such blossoms. They landed at his feet, dissolving into nothing as soon as they touched the earth. His pulse quickened. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, slow, knowing. "You already know." Somewhere deep in the woods, a fox cried out. The sound, high and sharp, echoed through the night like an unanswered question. A flicker of movement, just at the edges of his vision. He turned sharply, but there was nothing there. Only shadows shifted between the trees. The woman lifted her hand slightly, palm facing upward as if offering something unseen. The night itself seemed to respond, growing denser, weightier. Rotaro felt the pull, not toward her, but toward something greater, something vast and waiting beyond the threshold of what he understood. The lantern's glow dimmed, casting shifting patterns against the ground. He could almost see something within them. Figures dancing, swirling like ink in water, too fluid to be fully human. His fingers twitched, the familiar ache of creation stirring in his hands. He should leave, turn away, walk back to the village and let the stories remain stories. But he would not. He had been searching for something all his life, and now it had found him. The wind whispered around them, carrying a scent that was neither wisteria nor earth but something in between, something fleeting and eternal. The night deepened. The wind began to rise. The house stood at the forest's edge, a quiet structure of dark wood and paper screens that shuddered with every whisper of wind. The scent of ink and wisteria lingered within, curling through the air like an unseen presence. Rotaro knelt before a blank canvas, brush poised just above the silk. Across from him, the silver-haired woman sat in perfect stillness, her gaze unwavering, her expression unreadable. "Why do you hesitate?" she asked, tilting her head ever so slightly. Rotaro swallowed. The request had been simple, and yet his fingers refused to move. The space between them pulsed with something unspoken, something deeper than words. He had painted noble women, wanderers, even a priestess once, but never had he painted someone who felt less like a subject and more like a threshold into another world. The candle beside him flickered. For the briefest moment, the room shifted. The walls stretched, the lantern swayed without cause, and the ink in his well darkened, deepening into something unfathomable. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. His throat tightened. He dipped his brush into the ink. The first stroke landed on the silk, smooth and deliberate. The second followed. As he worked, the hush of the forest crept into the room, broken only by the rhythmic sound of his brush gliding across the canvas. The woman remained unmoving, but something about her presence felt fluid. Each time he looked up, she seemed slightly different, not in form but in essence, as though the painting he created was revealing her more truly than her own body. The candle burned lower. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, their branches scraping against the eaves of the house like whispering fingers. The shadows within the room deepened, stretching beyond their natural shapes. Still, he painted. Time slipped away. The strokes of his brush grew bolder, his hand moving with an urgency he did not understand. He was not merely capturing beauty. He was chasing something hidden beneath it. The silver strands of her hair, the delicate arch of her brow, the dark, knowing gaze that seemed to see beyond him. He painted her as she was, and yet, something more. The ink shimmered. Rotaro froze. Had the painting moved? He leaned closer, his heart hammering against his ribs. No, it was impossible. And yet, for the briefest moment, he could have sworn the painted strands of her hair had swayed as if caught in an unseen breeze. He turned his gaze back to the woman before him. She was watching him. Her lips, ever so slightly, curved into a smile. A gust of wind howled outside. The lanterns flickered violently, their light casting jagged shapes across the walls. The shadows lengthened once more, crawling toward the canvas as if drawn to it. The ink, still wet, gleamed in the dim light, unnaturally dark. Something was happening. The woman stood, moving with a grace that defied the weight of the world. "It is nearly finished." Rotaro's breath came shallow. He did not understand why, but his fingers ached. His skin tingled with a sensation he could not name. The painting was not merely an image. It was something else entirely. She stepped forward, her fingertips brushing the edge of the canvas. The moment her skin met the silk, the ink rippled. Rotaro recoiled. The painting rippled. A sound soft and distant, yet piercing, filled the air. like wind through distant trees, like a voice calling from the depths of a dream. She turned to him, her dark eyes shining. "You see it now, do you not?" The air in the room grew heavy. The ink upon the canvas was no longer mere pigment. It pulsed with something alive, something ancient. Rotaro felt as though he had stepped beyond the boundaries of what he had known, into a realm that had waited, patient and unseen, for him to find it. Outside, the wind rose into a wailing cry. The room darkened, the candles sputtered, and then the ink moved. The ink did not fade. Rotaro sat motionless, staring at the painting before him. The candle's final breath had plunged the room into darkness, yet the canvas remained visible, as though lit from within. The silver-haired woman stood exactly as he had painted her, but something beneath the surface had changed. Her painted eyes gleamed, depthless, watchful. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, the wind howled outside, rattling the wooden walls. The scent of ink and wisteria curled through the air, thickening like a veil. The paper screens trembled, their delicate frames groaning under an unseen force. And still, the painting waited. Rotaro's breath came shallow. He had finished the work, yet he knew this was not an ending. A whisper unfurled from the canvas. "It is time." The ink rippled. The silver strands of the painted woman's hair swayed, though no breeze touched them. The folds of her robe deepened, their shadows stretching. The fox, once nothing more than a stroke of black ink, turned its head, its golden eyes burning. The symbols he had unknowingly traced into the silk pulsed, shifting, rearranging themselves into something old, something waiting. Rotaro's pulse pounded. His hands ached from gripping the brush, though he no longer held it. The air thickened, pressing against his skin, filling his lungs with something more than breath. Something unseen stirred. The candle, long extinguished, flared back to life. The flame burned silver. The woman stepped forward. Not the painted woman, the real one, or perhaps there had never been two. She stood before him, unchanged, and yet entirely different. The air around her shimmered, bending like heat over stone. The silver threads of her hair gleamed, caught between light and shadow. The fox appeared at her side, its form flickering between solid and something more ephemeral. She lifted a hand. The painting lifted with it. Rotaro could not move. The ink upon the canvas swirled, flowing as though alive. The trees he had painted rustled with wind that did not belong to this world. The fox turned toward him, its gaze filled with knowing. The silver-haired woman's lips parted, yet her voice was not her own. It was layered, distant, as if spoken through time itself. "You have woven something beyond yourself." The ink coiled around the edges of the painting, spilling past its frame, stretching toward the wooden floor like veins creeping toward flesh. Rotaro tried to step back, but his body no longer obeyed. What have I done?" The fox watched him. The woman smiled. "You have given it form." The ink climbed his fingertips. A pulse of cold spread through his veins. An unfamiliar, aching sensation that was neither pain nor relief. The symbols upon the silk glowed faintly as if whispering among themselves. The wind outside howled, rising into a wailing cry that sent a shudder through the house's frame. The air trembled, bending, stretching, and then, stillness. The ink halted, its tendrils frozen mid-motion. The fox's burning gaze softened. The woman lowered her hand. The silver candlelight flickered, then steadied. Rotaro inhaled sharply, stumbling back, his chest heaving. The ink, once wild and untamed, had settled. The painting, though unchanged in composition, now held something deeper within its lines. Something waiting, watching. The woman looked at him, a glimmer of something almost human in her gaze. "It is done." Rotaro stared at the canvas. The air around it no longer swirled. The ink no longer pulsed. Yet he knew this was no ordinary painting. It was a door, and doors did not always stay closed. A silence settled between them. Outside, the wind had ceased. The scent of ink and wisteria still clung to the air, but now it felt hollow, as if something had left or perhaps something had entered. Rotaro's hands trembled. His gaze flickered to the woman. What happens now? She tilted her head, considering. That is up to you. He swallowed. His fingers curled. He had spent his life chasing beauty, seeking to capture the ephemeral in strokes of ink. But now he had painted something beyond mere form. He had painted something real, and he did not know if it was his creation or if it had created him. The silver-haired woman turned, stepping toward the paper screen. The fox followed, its form flickering as it moved. At the threshold, she paused. Keep painting, Rotaro. Her voice curled through the air like smoke. And one day you may find me again. The screen slid open. The night stretched beyond. And in a whisper of wisteria-scented wind, she was gone. The house stood silent. Rotaro turned back to the canvas. The ink no longer moved. The fox's golden eyes remained locked within the frame. Yet now, they did not burn. He exhaled. The candle flickered once more. And then, the wind began to rise.